I'm Casey Blackmore with the Kenton County Public Library, and today is March 6, 2019. I'll be interviewing Thurman Wenzl at the Covington branch of Kenton County Public Library. The other person attending the interview is our videographer, Mike Bloom, of the Kenton County Public Library. This interview is being conducted for the Kenton County Public Library Veteran History Project in conjunction with the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. So good morning, Mr. Wenzl. Could you please state your full name, birth date, your branch of service, highest rank attained, and dates of service?
My name is Thurman Wenzl. Dates of service 1965 to 67. Born August 1941. Commissioned 1963 in the Navy, following Navy ROTC at Rensselaer Poly in Troy, New York. Is there anything else?
Highest rank attained?
Lieutenant Junior grade.
Okay. All right, awesome. Just some biographical information to get started here. When and where were you born?
I was born in Mineola, New York, on Long Island, close to my mother's family home. I grew up outside Albany, New York, in a suburb called Delmar, New York.
And what are your parents' names?
My father's Theodore Wenzl, mother Pauline.
Okay. And what did they do for a living?
Both were well educated. My father was an administrator in the New York State Education Department, graduate of the School of Education at Columbia University. And my mother was a former history teacher before I was born, also a graduate degree from Columbia University School of Education.
So it sort of runs in the family, I guess, education.
Yeah.
Do you have any siblings as well?
A brother and a sister. My brother's 2 years younger, studied at Boston University, now retired in North Carolina. My sister Paula is 4 years younger than me, undergraduate degree from American University, retired in one of the Washington, D.C. suburbs.
Okay. And just what was your home life? What was your home life?
Home life like? Through the 50s. I graduated from high school in 1959. I was already a library nerd in high school times. My father was one of the officers of the local public library in Delmar, New York. I was an unsuccessful athlete in high school. I participated in a lot of things, but was not good at any of them.
Did you have a favorite sport?
I attempted cross country, wasn't very fast. In college, I played lacrosse for 2 years, wasn't very good. So I was a physically active young man, but not particularly good at it. And I still walk a lot, probably as a result of having been active as a kid. I wasn't a super good student. I was a good student at math and science, and liked history very much. But literature did not excite me at the time. One unusual aspect of those home life years, interestingly enough, because my father was the semi-high ranking administrator in the education department, I was introduced to Harry Truman in 1957 in an academic event where he got an honorary degree. Actually had a 2-sentence conversation with Harry Truman in 1957. It's kind of remarkable. He asked me what my favorite subject was. Oh, math and history.
Okay, and where did you go to high school? Do you remember the high school name?
Suburban high school is called Bethlehem Central in Delmar, New York.
And college as well? Where'd you go?
College would have been an engineering school about 10 miles northeast of Albany, Rensselaer Polytechnic, also known as RPI.
Okay.
Math and science oriented place.
Okay. We already covered a little bit about the athletics and the extracurriculars, which is my next question, but did you work during high school as well, or prior to military service?
Yes. What year? I think at age 15 I began caddying at a suburban golf course. So each summer for 5 summers I worked at a golf course. Remarkably low wages, 2 golf bags, 18 holes, 5.5 hours, and $6.
Yeah.
Did that for 5 years. Summers, while in college, I worked for the New York Telephone Company, separating slugs and Canadian money from coined telephone receipts.
Okay. All right. And just to get into some information about your early service. You said that you joined the ROTC. Was this when you're at, I believe, UVA maybe? Or when did you?
The UVA would have been after my military, at Rensselaer Poly in Troy, New York.
Okay.
I became a ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps midshipman in the fall of '59, freshman year.
Okay. Yeah, and what was that like?
So each semester we took an extra course. Typical undergraduate courses was 5. So we took a 6th course each semester in naval science, which included a variety of things like the etiquette associated with the military, as well as the engineering of ships, kind of foreign policy from the perspective of the Navy, battleships around the world, protecting U.S. interests. And that service included a summer cruise for training actually on a ship. Of course, that was all classroom study. Summer of 1962, I served a month on a so-called fleet oiler out of Newport, Rhode Island. A fleet oiler is a great big floating gas station. Sails out into the ocean to refuel warships while they're practicing.
Okay. And when did you decide on the Navy as your branch that you wanted to go into?
Probably because I was interested in maritime things as a Sea Scout at age 14, 15. 2 of my father's friends were Navy veterans. My father was not a veteran. Don't quite know why he avoided military service, because he was eligible. Perhaps because he was a state government officer perceived to be needed in that job.
Okay.
But anyway, my father had close friends who were naval veterans, and there was a draft at the time, of course.
Right.
So the thinking of a 1959 high school graduate was, well, when you get drafted after I finished college, would it be better to be an officer? So you volunteer to take the ROTC training to become an officer.
I guess that's the next question. Like, what did you know about Vietnam War before you were commissioned? Did you know, like, from the news
Nothing
and
at
stuff
all.
like that? Nothing? Okay.
No. One really unusual experience while I was in college. One of my teachers, who would have been a naval officer, suddenly disappeared in 1961. The reason being he was slightly fluent in Russian. It was the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. My teachers was suddenly transferred to the South Atlantic to be part of the Navy's investigation of the ships that were carrying missiles to Cuba. But no, we knew nothing about Vietnam in the 59 to 63 period.
Okay. I guess maybe talk a little bit more about your teaching there. So when did you actually leave to go teach? And you went to California first, I believe, at the postgraduate naval school?
That's right. After I was commissioned in 1963, and most of my fellow ROTC people went directly into the Navy. 2 of us chose to go to grad school prior to being called to active duty. And I left Troy for Charlottesville, Virginia in June '63 to study mathematics for 2 years. So I was almost done with a master's degree in math in spring '65, when the Navy suggested that rather than drive ships, they could employ me as a math teacher. So it would have been spring '65 that I opted to take time off from grad school for 2 years to serve in the Navy as a teacher. And that institution, to give it a name, the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. It's a place for naval officers to get master's degrees in engineering, etc.
I imagine people were on pins and needles with as hot as the Cold War was cooking at that time. Is that safe to say?
And the war in Vietnam was starting to cook up in '65. Some of my students in Monterey, California, had been driving riverboats around the Mekong Delta before they came to the same job that you can visualize John Kerry having held. Very small boat with a machine gun cruising around with, Vietnamese independence fighters in the bushes. Very dangerous work. And my students were, and a curious fact about ages. All of my students were older than me. I was 25, 24. I was 24 when I started teaching. All of my students were at least 25 because they had finished a couple of, maybe 24, had finished a couple of years of active duty already and were coming back. And the reason that they were at the postgraduate school, the Navy understands it's expensive to train naval officers. So that every naval officer they want to persuade to stay in the Navy as long as they're willing to. So the postgrad school offered people master's degrees in engineering in response for double the time to stay in the Navy. So 25-year-old naval officers said, well, we'll give you we'll help you get an aeronautical engineering degree, year and a half or 2 years, if you promise to spend 4 more years in the military.
Okay.
And that's the motivation for why the Navy does it and why people get the degrees.
I always get the sense that it's very serious business.
Definitely serious business, yeah.
During that time, do you still keep in touch with people, like maybe some of your former students or other people you worked with?
I kept in touch with the grad students in Charlottesville, definitely. I was definitely on a math professor track at the time. So yeah, that was my aspiration in 65, 66. Gradually getting to be aware of the controversy about what was going on in Southeast Asia, but that was a gradual process.
Right, yeah. I know you mentioned earlier some of the information you sent me about maybe listening to some of the radio stations out of Berkeley or certain things like that. Was that sort of what informed you to start with about that there were some other opinions about Vietnam that you might not have?
That's right. This is before National Public Radio. There's a very small network called the Pacific Foundation that was founded in Berkeley in the late 40s. And their station in Berkeley I could receive in Monterey, and it was very much an alternate view of foreign policy in Southeast Asia. Plus they played classical music that I liked a lot too. So yeah, I began to learn alternate viewpoints in 65 to 66 period.
Those are people you work with or some of your students, did you sort of see that sentiment also come up with them, or was it sort of?
One person with whom, after a year in Monterey, I was transferred to Annapolis, Maryland at the Naval Academy. One of my fellow teachers at the Naval Academy had been in naval intelligence in Saigon.
Okay.
So a conversation with him about the details of what was going on. He didn't know the identity of any of the so-called Vietnamese spies in his office, but he was pretty sure that there were some Vietnamese independence fighter spies in his office in Saigon. He could flesh out the whole idea of the alternate to the Cold War view had it communism against freedom. But of course, my friend George Rieger understood better that it was much more complicated independence struggle with most Vietnamese not believing that there were separate countries, for example.
Between California and Maryland, what were like any big differences between teaching there that you can think of?
Yes, the California job was very flexible and in civilian clothes. The Annapolis job definitely required a uniform.
Yeah.
The California job was more flexible in that I was teaching more advanced math. The students already had bachelor's degrees, most of them at least. So I was teaching not quite advanced calculus, but moderately hard calculus. At Annapolis, it was very much a structured thing for freshmen and sophomores in college. So it was very much more structured, step by step. Believe it or not, there were 40 of us in the junior math faculty, and all the students got the same exam. So all 40 faculty members followed the same path through the curriculum because everybody was taking the same exam. So it was very much more structured in Annapolis than in Monterey, where it was kind of more open-ended about how I taught what I taught.
Well, you even saying the word calculus just brings back some bad memories for me.
Yeah, it's been a long time since
I like math too, but
it was something I was good at the time, right? So, you know, there were a lot of things I was not good at, but I could understand calculus, I could explain it. That's why I did this work for 2 years.
Maybe go back to when you and Mike were talking about it. So you were actually out on a ship at any point, or was it just teaching? I know you say you didn't do any
twice.
combat.
I was actually out on a ship.
Okay, yeah.
Summer of 1962 would have been after my junior year, before my senior year. I don't remember, it was 6 or 4 weeks. AO-109 is the symbol for the USS Whack-A-Mole, floating gas station, Navy lingo, fleet oiler. Hoses maybe 9 inches around, connected to another ship pump the oil through. Ships out in the ocean are not meant to get close to one another. Fleet oilers have to get close to the other ship, and it's a dangerous business to pair ships cruising down the ocean 50 feet apart.
So
it's considered super dangerous. It's not meant to happen, except in refueling operations.
And they can be targets. I know the Japanese blew one up, the Mississauga, which caused a huge fire, an oiler back in World War II. It was a torpedo that was banned. It was a suicide torpedo that got in, and it was in a bay of, I can't remember what, you know how they
Western Pacific somewhere.
Yeah, they park them all together.
Yeah.
And there's even footage of it where it was a huge fire, and the Japanese thought that they actually sunk 5 or 6 ships based on
the size of the fuel ship that got blown up.
Yeah. So I mean, I believe I've heard that and read it's dangerous work.
Yeah. In one weird Cold War story associated with the fleet oiler in the North Atlantic, occasionally we had to train for emergency breakaways. The two ships are connected by a cable that supports this hose. There were Russian spy ships out in the same part of the North Atlantic, and occasionally we were told that the Russian spy ships tried to get in the way physically of, I was never present when they tried to get in the way, but it takes a few minutes, of course, to hook up a ship to another ship. And there's such a thing as an emergency breakaway meant if you've got to, they've got to just do this and cut loose all the equipment. Very dangerous business. So one of our things we practiced was emergency breakaways in case the Russian trawler got too close to my ship or the one that we were refueling at the time. So that was an important training in what was really going on in the ocean.
Yeah. Both of the ships will get away from each other as fast as possible after break it down, right? Yeah. Isn't that the deal? They kick it down,
and the equipment goes flying. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be on the deck when that equipment breaks because it's going to bounce back. The other at-sea experience was while I was a grad student. Each summer I had to spend active duty for training out of Norfolk, Virginia. And that was where I was on the destroyer. Part of the time the destroyer was in a dry dock being repaired in Portsmouth, Virginia, and part of the time I was out in the ocean. And it was a stormy day, and it was an interesting introduction to open ocean sailing in a destroyer, which is considered a smallish ship by the standards of the U.S. Navy.
Prior to that, had you had any sort of experience being out at sea like that, or just this is your first time sort of doing that kind
as
of
I
stuff?
grew up, I was interested in maritime things, so I knew and enjoyed canoeing around upstate New York, and very briefly in the Hudson River near Albany. A bunch of us Sea Scouts traveled on open ocean. That trip on the oiler was the first time in the open ocean, which is a little scary.
Yeah, I imagine so, yeah. So after you're done at Annapolis, did you go back to New York to your family, or did you stick around there for a while? Or
my 2 years of service finished in June 1967. 1 year in California, 1 year in Maryland teaching. At that point, I was still aspiring to become a math professor. So I returned to grad school at Charlottesville, Virginia, University of Virginia, to continue advanced mathematical study, which I continued for 2 years, 67 to 69. I spent as a full-time grad student in Charlottesville.
I guess, did you see maybe after the war, after Vietnam ended, or around those sort of ramping down, did you see people being treated differently that came back from the war in that sort of way, or?
Very interesting question. In my case, I have no recollection. I suspect those stories are being exaggerated. I definitely was not treated badly, nor did any of the people. No, I should go back to the story about what I did as I came back to grad school. Get the timeline straight. June 67 would have been when I moved from Annapolis back to Charlottesville. I was already kind of privately critical of what the U.S. government was doing in Southeast Asia. But I attended my first anti-war demonstration in October 67. This would have been 4 months after leaving. Organized my first, in the process of participating in the very early stages of the anti-war movement in the fall of '67. I gradually got familiar with other people on the UVA campus, and we began demonstrating around campus in the spring of '68. As part of that movement to build a student movement against what the U.S. government was doing, I'm fairly certain none of the people with whom I organized treated any returning veterans badly. I was not treated badly as a returning veteran. I suppose it happens elsewhere in the country, but I have no direct knowledge of it, and I suspect those stories are exaggerated. But
I was going to say maybe being
that.
Yeah, I would suspect maybe being like a college town, you would have a little bit more of that anti-war sentiment, maybe, and not be as unusual, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So,
Yeah.
other places, but,
Charlottesville was definitely a college town.
Yeah.
Part of it, at least.
Let me see here.
Excuse me.
Are you still active in any sort of veterans organizations? Obviously, from your cap there.
I'm still active in peace organizations
Right.
that try to argue that many of these conflicts can't be settled militarily. Got to understand what's really going on. And in the case of Vietnam, of course, I gradually came to understand that this was basically a national independence struggle, as opposed to a Cold War image. Those communists are invading the free people of South Vietnam. That whole story gradually came to understand that was just incorrect based on congressional hearings in 1967, a lot of controversy in the late 60s about what was really going on in Southeast Asia, and
Right.
continue to be active around those issues.
Let me see, and I guess to wrap it up, some reflections. Obviously, how did military service or living during Vietnam War experience, how did that affect your life, if it did at all? Or obviously it sort of melded?
Yeah, it affected my life very much.
Okay.
I just alluded to gradually first anti-war demonstration was at the Pentagon in October 1967, gradually organizing around the UVA campus, both around university reform and opposition to the military. So gradually, in the course of thinking about all those issues, I gradually came to have doubts about whether I really wanted to be a math professor.
Okay.
And left grad school in August '69 to become kind of an independent scholar / organizer. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that language, but so yes, the experience between '65 and '67 played a huge role in me changing my mind about my career path.
Okay.
And coming back to the whole idea of Charlottesville as a university town, gradually we came to understand, the activists on campus gradually came to understand there were problems in society as well as in higher education, that we came to understand that we needed a more democratic higher education system. For example, a glaring thing, University of Virginia is a public university.
Right.
The first women undergraduates attended UVA as a result of a lawsuit in 1969. The state of Virginia still did a separate but equal thing based on gender at UVA. So that's just an example of class issues. We came to understand that the east side of Charlottesville was a working class part of town as opposed to the west side where the university is, and that those issues of poverty and race and gender all combined. And that's one of the things I came to feel more like I wanted to participate in that process, which is why I left grad school. I'm happy I did. Many years later, I went back to grad school in workplace safety and earned a PhD at age 50.
All right.
Do you remember feeling frustrated or angry at any, Chinese, Russian, Vietnamese, or it was just you were going about your life and didn't really have time for stuff like that? Because I remember growing up in the latter part of the Cold War where the movies and TV kind of steered you that way, where it was the right thing to do to dislike communism.
I was certainly brought up in that environment. For lack of a better term, I was brought up as a liberal Republican in upstate New York. I voted for Nelson Rockefeller in 1962 for governor. As far as being angry at anybody from those societies, no. But I'm certainly part of that culture of Cold War thinking. But I think I gradually moved away from it, from reading about what was going on in Southeast Asia. You know, because we were being told, of course, that it was there was the domino theory was believed by some people. You know, if the communists were victorious in Vietnam, then they'd move into Indonesia and somehow threaten the west coast of the United States. No, that can't be true. And then we gradually came to understand that this was really a successor war to the Vietnamese throwing the French colonial powers out, and that they just saw the U.S. as acting a little bit, the U.S. government acting a bit like the French and wanting to control part of Vietnam. And in that sense, Ho Chi Minh, many of us perceived Ho Chi Minh to be kind of the Vietnamese equivalent of George Washington, standing for national independence. So no, but that was again a gradual process between 64 and 68, I guess.
I've read some about the Gulf of Tonkin and what went on there. It seems awful murky to me.
Very murky, exactly. The Gulf of Tonkin might have been 1967, and it marked a major escalation and major justification for Johnson to bomb North Vietnam.
A prelude to war, basically.
Supposedly some North Vietnamese small boats were attacking a U.S. destroyer or something just off the coast of Vietnam. And murky is a good word to refer to the, it was clearly exaggerated by the U.S. government to justify an escalation. It's not clear that the U.S. ships were really under any threat from North Vietnamese small boats.
But it gave people what they needed to ramp it up.
Yeah.
And a lot of people made a lot of money off of that war too. I know I've had veterans tell me that some people got awfully rich because of the war machine.
Yeah, a lot of machinery to, and recently we've been reminded of the old pretty pictures of Hanoi last week. Right. This is the same city that Nixon bombed over Christmas in 1972. I remember demonstrating in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia on Christmas Day, 1972, opposing what Nixon was doing in Hanoi that day. It's kind of striking. And the demonstration, interesting enough, was at the same park that has variously been called Robert E. Lee Park and Freedom Park, where some of the Nazis confronted the civil rights people 2 years ago in Charlottesville. It was one of the places we were active 50 years earlier.
Yeah. I guess to wrap up, do you have anything else to add? I know you brought some great stuff with you. If you want to maybe, I don't know if we can get that into the frame, maybe talk a little bit about stuff you brought with you today.
Well, I brought some historical stuff that helps elaborate on how things have changed since 1963 when I became an ensign in the U.S. Navy. Rensselaer, where I was an undergraduate, was very much a science and technology kind of place where the Navy was happy to recruit people because, for example, I knew a lot of physics, so the Navy would have been very interested in persuading me to drive a nuclear submarine around. Yeah. Because I would have been the kind of person who would be excellent at understanding how the machinery of a nuclear submarine worked. Another friend of mine, a math major at RPI as I was, Ron's Latiper, whose picture from the yearbook, he spent 30 years in the Navy and went on to become the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet before retiring a few years ago. Some of the other things about awareness of what naval service is like. The same spring that we were finishing our ROTC training, a brand new nuclear submarine sunk off of New Hampshire with many deaths. USS Thresher sunk with 129 victims as a brand new nuclear submarine had a faulty weld. And so we were debating in like April of 1963 about the relative dangers of the different branches of the U.S. Navy. This is not Vietnam related, just peacetime U.S. Navy could be a very dangerous place to work in 1963, whether in submarines or in naval aviation. So it was very, very culturally different time than today.
Now later on in the 60s, the Pueblo was taken, and it's still in North Korea.
As I recall, the Pueblo was a U.S. intelligence ship off the coast of North Korea. Don't remember exactly what happened. Was it captured by the North Korean Navy?
Yes. It was
I don't remember
taken.
what year that would have been.
They basically accused them of going over a line that,
Got too close, and
and how lines are, they become blurred, and
I'm not remembering those details, but that sounds like
it's still a Navy registered ship sitting in Pyongyang, North Korea, as a museum ship that people go and tour from North Korea to check it out. I think they renamed it, but it's pretty much.
I mean, it's kind of a symbolic thing. The U.S. Navy uses some of its retired ships as symbols of power, so it would be logical the North Koreans would. It would be one of their prizes of. Actually, they perceive it as defending themselves from foreign spies, which isn't such a stretch.
I guess just to wrap up, is there anything we missed that you might want to talk about? Anything else that's important that you want to include in your interview? Or
I'll get a few shots of those when we're done.
Okay.
Take your time. Go ahead.
Okay.
If there's anything that you haven't said that you'd like to mention.
Well, I guess just briefly elaborate on your question about how did that experience of gradually growing critical of what the U.S. military was doing. 65 to 67 period definitely would have been when I began to read more widely and think about alternate opinions about what was going on. Certainly influenced my life hugely. Not just leaving grad school, but getting interested in race and class issues around Virginia, because I gradually morphed from being an anti-war activist in the fall of '67 to being a university reform activist and making Virginia a more democratic place. And that meant thinking about poor people on the east side of Charlottesville working in textile mills. And that's been very much part of my life for the 50 years that followed that. Being an activist around working class issues. I'm now a volunteer with the Cincinnati Interfaith Worker Center, helping out low-wage people with problems at work. And sometimes that's specific to the workplace safety education I've received more recently, or just wages and working conditions. So that period, to summarize, that period that we started out talking about played a very big role in my change of careers.
I guess maybe just to follow up with that, you said you grew up in like a liberal Republican home. What did your parents sort of think? Did you come back and say, well, here's what I think about the war, it's a little bit different from what you might have thought, even though I served? Like, were they a little disappointed or not agree?
My parents were not upset. We lived in different places at the time, so we didn't have detailed heart-to-heart conversations about how I was gradually changing careers. They were liberal Republicans, opposed to race discrimination, although I was in a suburb that was all white. I met black people on the golf course, but didn't have any black friends. There were no blacks in my high school. One interesting thing, I'm very active since the early 70s in the Democratic side of the trade union movement. My father was a leader of a professional association of New York State employees, a little bit like the National Education Association. Started out as a professional association of teachers. Now it's much more like a union. Specifically the KEA, the Kentucky Education Association. Started as a professional association, now it's like a union to pressure the state government. The Civil Service Employees Association in New York. My father was the high leader of that group. Gradually morphed into being a union. But my father was very anti the labor movement because he identified the labor movement with people like Jimmy Hoffa and George Meany, which is a common problem to identify unions with the fat white guys who were in front of the camera. And in my case, I very much identify unions with ordinary people gathering together to improve their conditions. So that was one bit of tension between my father and I, but we lived in separate cities and didn't argue about that.
Okay, I guess like Mike said, if you want to show some of your artifacts there.